And I think what you're describing is that idea to see yourself as if, and that all beings, even good beings, bad beings, evil, this, that, they're already enlightened. They never left. They never could be anything different. To just play with that idea, it's still a vritti, it's still an idea, but playing with it can lead to realization.
So beautiful. Is that not namaste?
And welcome to Dregs of Wisdom with Andrew Tanner.
Welcome, everyone, to Dregs of Wisdom, episode 17. Oh, my goodness. I have a really special guest for you today. It's a friend of mine that I met during the COVID pandemic. He is a yoga teacher for, I think, nearly 38 years. Jeff Bailey is the founder of Avita Yoga. He has studios, or he had studios for a long time in Boulder, Colorado, 2 of them. And then during the COVID pandemic, he really found different ways of sharing his gift. He teaches retreats all over the world. He'll be at the Berkshire Yoga Festival. He also has an online yoga community called Avita Yoga Online. And what's really special about Jeff, in my opinion, is he brings his background as a rolfer, which is like a special type of body worker. We'll get into that. As with an intimate knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics, with a truly connected spiritual self. And I have seen from his classes and his workshops, helping people heal parts of their body that they never thought they could, even in advanced ages in their life, and also finding a grounded sense of true spirituality in their practice. So Jeff is teaching at the Berkshire Yoga Festival this summer. His classes are actually already sold out. We may have to give him another one. But I hope that many of you will go and check out his stuff. So Jeff, so happy to have you here. Welcome. My first question to you is, if yoga means to join, then what does it mean to join?
Oh, wow. Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate being here on your show. And you couldn't have asked a better question. Almost think that was a setup, because I walked in, the story goes like this. I walked into my first yoga class at age 22. It was in 1980, must have been like 84 or so. I'm never good with numbers. So it was around 84. I was around 22. And I don't know how I ended up in this class. I just did. I think, who sent me to that? What did I see that drew me to that class? And now I look back, and it's just spirit guiding me right through those doors. And when I walked out of that class, I felt like I had just come to life. I felt like I had taken my first breath in a way. And I was just so lit up. And I went to the teacher and I said, what is this thing called yoga? You know, because few people had heard about yoga in the early 80s. And he explained it to me, and I said, well, what does yoga mean? And he said, well, yoga means to join. And I immediately thought, if yoga means to join, then why did we spend an hour trying to pull ourselves apart? And it just didn't add up. And so it became a koan for me. I was just hook, line, and sinker into this thing called yoga. And so all through my 20s, I led bicycle tours for a living. But everywhere I went, I'd drop into ashrams and study with different teachers, and I would guide the groups oftentimes through some yoga on our lunch stops and things like that. And it just became part of my life. But I never stopped asking, what does it mean to join? And what I can say is that about 10 years later, around age 29, 30 or so, I stumbled into A Course in Miracles. I was on my floor of this. I was renting a house in Boulder. I had just moved to Boulder. I was legs wide, doing yoga, and I looked up on the shelf, and there's this book, and I opened it up, and the answer just jumped off the pages. And so that became a deep part of my practice, that book and that study. And so now I can actually answer the question. I can say, first of all, I never stop asking that question. It's still, what does it mean to join? Leads us to the answer, which is joined unity, true self. You know, it's the Greeks, and Socrates had it, know thyself above all else. And it goes beyond just knowing our likes and dislikes. In fact, those can just get in the way. It has to do with joining with the undifferentiated mind, perfect unity, which is the source of happiness and peace. So it goes beyond the body, it goes beyond the world, but I think that's what yoga is all about. And I think it's what brings us to a meditation practice. I think ultimately it brings us to any spiritual practice.
When was there was there an experience where it all made sense? Was it when you were reading the Course in Miracles? Was there a peak experience that you had where the meaning of the meaning of unity? I think the idea of yoga as unity consciousness, or the kind of peak spiritual experience. We've all heard of it. We all read it on little Instagram, pages. When did you actually experience that? Or is that something you feel like you've experienced?
Wow. We're going deep. Thank you for that question. I can say that yoga, I'll say at one point on a bicycle tour, I got everybody's luggage to their room and I dropped onto the floor and I'm doing my yoga and that similar, very quiet voice came in the midst of me questioning my life and saying, what am I doing here? How am I ever going to make it as a bicycle tour leader? And there I am doing my yoga. And this little nudge came in and said, just relax. Yoga is going to be a part of your life and it's going to take care of you, And so I thought, wow, where did that come from? But I even challenged that. And in my, let me see, this would be in my 40s, I guess. In my 40s, I really pushed against that guidance and got into real estate. Just said, okay, I gotta mainstream, man. Yoga is just not enough, and all my friends are out there making tons of money and this and that, and so I kind of abandoned my practice. I set the course aside in a way. I still had lots of its insights in my heart and mind, but I set it aside and sure enough, buried myself in problems. Just buried myself. And I sometimes we hear about the dark night of the soul and that we have to go through the trouble and through the dark. My wife and I had trouble in our marriage that we came close to divorce. And I thought that I had, in getting bogged down in this real estate deal, I thought that I had just kind of crushed my family. And none of it was true, but the belief was so strong. These are always false beliefs. Any belief in separation, any kind of angst, any worry, any doubt, any fear separates. It makes me afraid and alone. And yoga joins. And so in probably the darkest moment of my life, I literally got down on my knees and prayed. And I wrote down this prayer. I just wrote it down. And I'm like, it was like sending up the help signal. It was a giant help with exclamation point. And whether you believe in God or any of that, it doesn't really even matter. When you ask for help in a deep way, I can say that it works. And it's in that moment that we join, and it's like Spirit just sends in helpers. The Course calls it mighty companions. It sends in people when you really go deep and ask. And the next day, I had a real sleepless night that night. And the next day I woke up, the sun was out, and people started showing up. And I didn't really understand it until I really started looking back. And even my wife, Lori, she said, Jeff, in really hard times, I go to lesson number 34. The Course has 365 lessons. And lesson number 34 says, I can see peace instead of this, fill in the blank. Mm. And I'd done that lesson many times, but I just took it to a much deeper level. And suddenly everything started to change in my life. And this real estate deal that was eating me up over the course of 2 years, I just chose not to let it bother me. In a way, I continued to see peace instead of a problem. And it just unraveled. It just all unraveled. And I probably ended up breaking even on it. I don't even know what the numbers were, but it wasn't devastating. And the right people came in and got it. But I'm sharing that because in the depths of that despair, somewhere in that, we could call it the recovery time, I had this dream that I was asking myself about the expanse of the universe. And I felt like I had my arms around the ends of the universe. And it was just endless and big and vast. And then this voice came in and said, that same voice came in and said, if you think that's big, here's what you really are. And it was just, I was just flooded with light and flooded with love. And I woke up in tears. I was just blasted open. And I can say that from that point on, nothing was the same, you know.
Wow. So that was, you experienced it in a dream.
Yeah, it was like in the wee hours of the morning, you know, the sun was just coming up. And so I was up and, you know, sharing it with Lori and just ripped open. And that's when that inspired a lot of writing and a yoga studio and ultimately this thing called Avita Yoga. And it just cascaded. And so, yeah, I mean, an experience like that is not necessary. It's not required, but sometimes we're fortunate enough to get one. And so,
well, that's what I'm really interested in. You know, that's what I'm interested in. I call that, you know, Dharma Mitra used to call that the backup light. Once you've had this experience of cosmic consciousness, unity consciousness, when the veil has been dropped and you've had a real experience, a visceral experience of yourself as the everything, the infinite, it's so freeing and empowering. And it's so splendiferous. And at the same time, it is so, doesn't change anything, but it changes everything.
It changes our perspective.
Yeah. And my goal in this podcast and everything we do is to help people find the dregs of wisdom that will lead them to that experience.
Yeah.
Because I think that's why we're here.
Totally. It's exactly why we're here.
So Dregs of Wisdom podcast is really all about this idea of helping people to find the backup light, helping people have that experience of cosmic consciousness that you described, whether they experience it in a dream, or whether they experience it through yoga practice, whether they experience it. I've noticed a lot of people, it comes as a result of living a certain type of examined life. And I'm curious, you know, what do you think led to you? What were the habits or thoughts or ways of being that led to you even wanting to continue to ask yourself that question? You know, that question of what is joining. You kept, it stayed with you because everyone's probably seen a Zen koan on an Instagram post. But for whatever, why do you think you chose to keep it with you? And what do you think was the little dregs, the little steps on the path that led to that night of that dream?
Yeah, great question. Well, the little steps, I would say, is a matter of, I call it an ongoing meditation. If you look at the Yoga Sutras, Sutra number 1 says, now is the practice. Now is the first word in the entire book of sutras. Now we practice. And if you really get that, if you get, you know, Eckhart Tolle's, how he explains the power of now, the healing in now, now is really the only time there is. And to experience that nowness, you have to release the past, and you cannot anticipate a future. And you certainly cannot hope for a revelatory experience. If you any kind of desire or wanting, these things just, we stumble into them, but not by accident. And it all has to do with an ongoing practice. So yes, I have a meditation. Yes, I have a daily practice, but it is not, what's the word? It's not ritualistic, because we can drop into these rituals where it's the same time, same thing every day. And then rituals can even start to put us to sleep or keep us asleep. So it's spontaneous, it's consistent, and it's a state of mind that we're going for. And when do we practice? Now. Why do we practice? So we can experience nowness. And then Yoga Sutra number 2 says, essentially, the way I translate it, it essentially says, if you want to have that experience of nowness, total peace and happiness, then you have to identify the obstacles and blockages to it and forgive it, release it, undo it. And then Sutra number 3 is, you do that. Every time you chip away at the blockages, you get closer to the only natural thing that you'll ever experience on planet Earth, and that is unity with what is true. And everything else takes effort and resistance, and it's instigated by fear and doubt and all that. And so we all have that. We all have that in common, and we can all use every single moment of our lives to watch this fear and watch how we react, and just give it up. You just hold it up and say, no, I don't want that anymore. And if we look at our lives, we see these patterns, and these patterns show up in our bodies. And that's why we have this thing called Vita Yoga, or a physical practice, where all we do is use shapes to find the blockages and release them. And the result is freedom. It's the same in the body as it is in the mind.
What is Avita? What does Avita Yoga mean, literally? And then, tell me more about why did you decide to kind of create your own system of yoga?
Yeah. Well, the name comes from my roots. I spent a good amount of time figuring out, what are we going to call this? And the roots come from where my dad grew up. I have pages of scribbling. I'm sure you've tried to come up with a name for something. You just keep writing it down. You bounce it off your friends and family. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. And then all of a sudden, there's this town in southwestern Colorado where my dad grew up called Levita.
Levita.
And I almost called it Levita Yoga.
That's kind of cool.
Levita means the life. And I think of this yoga as yoga for a lifetime, not just something we can practice into our older years. A lot of my students are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s. And I've had students in their 80s and 90s. I just had lunch with one of my dear, dear friends and yoga students who's been with me now for about 4 years. And she just turned 85. And she walks like a 20-year-old. She has this beautiful walk. It's so amazing. But Levita means the life. And if you ever pull up a picture of Levita, Colorado, you'll see why it's named that. It's unbelievably beautiful area. And so I almost called it Levita Yoga, but it sounds too much like that song.
La Vida Loca.
Yeah. So there was no way I could go with that. So then after a day or two, then I dropped the L and kept the rest. And the Latin still is kind of there for life, the Latin undertones.
Okay, so it's not Sanskrit based, because in Sanskrit would be non-vita.
You're right. Yeah.
But so tell us about why, for example, at the festival, one of your classes, I think, is on like healing your hips and lower back. And you're really, as a background as a rolfer and a body worker and understanding biomechanics and all that, what do you, what do you see as the most common thing that you're helping people with with the Vita Yoga?
Oh man, your questions are fantastic, Andrew. What's the most helpful thing? Well,
I mean, obviously getting them that cosmic consciousness, but you can't put that on your marketing material.
yeah, well, yeah, no, you can't. And cosmic consciousness is a big word, two big words. And so I reduce it a little bit to peace and happiness.
Mm.
And to me, that's the goal of a lifetime, is to find lasting peace. And it is the one thing, or you could say to find lasting happiness. If you accept that as a goal, then it will give purpose to your life. We cannot find purpose in life. We have to give purpose to it. And so then you say, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not happy. Nothing seems to work for me. I kind of got myself in this trap. How can I use these blockages in my life or my body to show me the light? It's a repurposing. And then life becomes the path. You don't really need special seminars. You don't need anything special, but you'll be guided to the ones that you're meant to go to that will point you in the right direction, which is always inner. And so the yoga, you'll hear in the book that I'm writing, I say it multiple times throughout the book. I say it during classes. It's on my website. Peace is the goal. And when you make peace the goal, that's when the blockages to it start to unwind. So I may come to a yoga class with a sore back, a hip issue, a shoulder issue. And yes, I want to get full range back in my shoulder. I want to get this hip issue relieved. Okay, your hip brought you to the practice. Make peace the goal. As much as the hip is bugging you, it's the medium. It's what got you to the practice. So we're going to use that hip pain. We're going to use that, and we're going to use it like, instead of trying to get rid of the pain, we start to repurpose it and we listen to it. We want to get to the source of the problem. We don't fight it. We don't try to eliminate it. And because joints love pressure, this Avita Yoga is a very kind and gentle compress and release practice. It is not a strength and stretch program. And so a lot of the time I spend helping people back off from the intensity of yoga and really start to listen. And what are they listening for? But what is healing sensation? There's a difference between pain and healing sensation. And when we start to go into it willingly and kindly and thoughtfully, there's a point where you're like, oh my God, I'm going into this painful area, but now I'm shaking hands with it. I'm befriending it. I feel kind of good here. This is amazing. That's where the physiology kicks in inside. And then you come back and go, oh yeah, peace is the goal. Peace is the goal. So it's a moving meditation that remedies the body in pretty amazing ways.
So do you think that, your students, it sounds like what you're teaching them is how to bring their awareness more and more subtly into their body? I think so many people are walking around like heads chopped off from their body, almost like zombies. They don't, you always ask someone who's never done yoga, like, do you have any pain in their body? Like, nah. And then you ask a yogi what you have going on, and they're like, oh, I got this thing in my shoulder. I got this thing here. I got this thing there. It sounds like you're first bringing people who maybe their pain has gotten so much that they've noticed it. And then you're teaching them how to find that pain and get to the source of it, to release it. I'm curious, talk a little more about, can you give us an example, for example, like of how you do that with a foot or a shoulder or a knee or a hip? What's the most common one that you work with?
Yeah, great question. Maybe the most common would be hip and low back. That's why I chose that. And
that workshop sold out fast.
Did it? Yeah. So So hip and low back and shoulders are always good because the hips are big and central, and any kind of trauma in our life is going to find its way into the hips. And so we go into the pattern, we go into the problem, we find the restriction, and we spend time with it. And the bones, physically speaking, the bones and the joint itself, here's your hip joint and all the fascia around it. That's the target. That's where the pain is coming from, because the fascia is loaded with proprioceptors. And so we use that feedback and we go into it. This is an example of the hip rolling over the head of the femur.
When you say going into it, you mean both moving, but then also you're bringing your attention to that area? Is that an important part of that?
Totally into it. Yeah. And what I say often is there's only one skill that you learn in Avita Yoga. What is that skill? Learning to differentiate the difference between pain and healing sensation. And too often, in many different fitness paradigms, we may, probably a lot of people even deny it, but what's underneath a lot of the activity is pain equals gain. I've got to push through this. I've got to stretch a little more. I've got to strengthen more. And more of anything is an idol. More of anything will keep us stuck in separation. And so we gently start to go backwards. And it's not like yin, it's not like restorative where you just kind of lounge and hang out in a comfortable shape. It can be a little intense, especially in the beginning. And what's coming up is the fear and the patterning and all the questioning and maybe memories and feelings that start to come up. And they have to come up so we can get them up and out in order to really remove those blockages on all levels.
Do people experience like emotional release as well, like in the middle of a class, or is this more done privately? How does it kind of work? Or do they do it, or do you teach them things that they can then do at home?
Yeah. Oftentimes emotions come up, but we simply let them come up. That's it. I don't speak to it very much at all because it's usually very intimate and very personal. And that's all we do. We don't analyze it. We don't try to figure it out. We don't, because any kind of analysis would be going back in time. Now, if it's helpful to share a story, if I'm doing a private session and somebody shares a story, then we can both just like, we release it together, and then you end up kind of laughing and whoa, it feels so good to let that go. But in class, what I would do is if I notice someone weeping, or sometimes they're in a shape and tears are just rolling down their face, there's lots of Kleenex boxes, and I just set a Kleenex box next to them. And that's just a demonstration of love. And that's all we need in that moment. And they know it's coming up and out.
So what motivates you, after experiencing kind of cosmic consciousness on your own, you said that motivated you to like start your studio and do all the work that you're doing. Sometimes there's this funny thing that happens when you experience this big reality. It also makes you realize that if everything is the now, we can never make the world perfect. There's always going to be darkness and light. What do you think it is that motivates you to help people and want to heal people and to do Avita Yoga?
Yeah. So I would substitute the word inspiration for motivation. Okay. Inspiration is spontaneous. It's in the moment. Nothing about, like, I remember soon after that experience, I was on a bike ride and I was mountain bike riding, I was on a little mountain bike ride, and these ideas were just flowing through. They were just, I would just say they were thoughts of love and light. And I started writing them down. And then the voice just said, write. So I had one of our dear friends, his name is Jean Langlois. He was one of my early spiritual teachers. And he ended up marrying Lori and I. And he's a retired older man. And so I started spending time with him. And we just started writing together this thing called The Gift that we never published. Huh. But it was for 2 years I would meet with him. It was like Tuesdays with Maury. I would meet with him at least 2, sometimes 3 times a week. And we wrote piles of stuff. And we just had so much fun writing.
How can you not publish this? You're crazy.
I know. Well, what happened was it was just inspired, and we called it The Gift, and I created this thing called thegift.org, which I'm actually about to take down. If you want to see thegift.org, you can go see it. But it just got what it was we write and we practice for ourselves first. When we heal for ourselves, and this gets back to your question, I think that when we heal for ourselves, we heal for all. And that is that idea in of itself, the idea that I have to help another, that I have to fix another, or that I have to fix the world
with politics and everything else.
Then I sacrifice myself to fix that. That creates a subject-object relationship.
Yep.
And in college, it reminds me, I've read this book called The I-Thou Relationship by Dr. Martin Buber. I bet you know who that is.
I don't know.
He was a Jesuit priest, and just this fabulous book on, he said we could change the subject-object relationship to the I-Thou relationship. I and thou are one. And so when I heal for myself, and when I find the peace and love in myself, because I'm part of the one whole in mind or spirit, that's how we save the world. There's a line in the Course that says, I'm paraphrasing, but it says, if you're going to heal the world, you must include yourself.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
I mean, why I had asked that question was because after my own similar experience, for days I was kind of sitting there like, well, what am I going to do now? Like, I don't have to do anything. Everything's already perfect. I don't have to, there's no world that I have to fix,
That's right.
But then the answer was, but I have this like Andrew body, and he's been teaching yoga for 20 years, and he's been doing this work. So that was the Dharma, to just keep doing that work. And like you said, you were just inspired because you're just doing, you were then actually given, I think, a mission or a Dharma. It was kind of, maybe it was downloaded through you from source. That's how it sounds from my ears.
Yeah.
But it's the other, I just think that's a really important point that, right now with everyone in the world, every election season, I feel like every 4 years, people get so obsessed with what's happening outside of themselves, and like how they can, what we're doing in the world. And I'm not saying those things aren't important to think about, but when they make a choice to not listen to their own inner voice, and to kind of go down the road of I can save the world, whether I'm on one side or the other, whatever they believe.
Yeah. I
think that is the fool's road to hell, the path to hell paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And I think the path that we're on is focusing on our own, selfishness towards selflessness. And I want to encourage more people to do that. I wonder how you deal. I'm sure people are constantly talking about politics and stuff in class, or I don't know, maybe they don't, but how do you deal with that with your students and friends that are on the path that maybe haven't drawn their focus inward? How do you help them? Not that they have to be helped, not that, we can help them, but what do you do about that?
Yeah. Well, the key is to that part of it is always meeting people exactly where they are. That's what we do. And that's how we join. see, we join ultimately into the oneness that we share in spirit. But to do that, I have to do it moment by moment. So that's what we're doing, Andrew. We're joining. We're 1,000 miles away or more, but we're joining in spirit. We feel this connection, and it's inspiring these great questions and this great interaction. And so if I bump into a person who has beliefs or opinions different than mine, which, by the way, the goal, if I'm going to be peaceful, I have to give up all my beliefs and all my opinions. I have to question every value I've ever had. And otherwise, if I have an opinion and a value that I'm holding on to, I can't be peaceful at the same time or happy. So in giving all that up, now I become a blank slate. That's the idea. And how do I test? How do I know if I'm a blank slate? I stand in the presence of someone who has an opinion that's maybe pushing my buttons. Oh man, there's nothing better. That's what makes life the classroom. And there I am wanting to dialogue and push back and yeah, but what if, and does anything good ever happen from that? No. It always maintains conflict and upholds separation. But what if you just practice? It's like you used the word experiment. Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. That's a strong statement. So if we go deep with that and start examining, not our behaviors, but our mind, we got to examine our thoughts. Now I'm in this situation where I want to fight back and want to share a different opinion, but instead I just, and I watch the buttons get pushed and I let them up and keep letting them up till one day there's no buttons left to push. That's how we heal the world. No saint or sage that ever had, an enlightened experience, or no saint or sage who had a glimmer of the truth ever said, go out and fix the world. They said, go inside. Gandhi said, be the change. He didn't say inflict the pain, and he didn't say inflict the change on others.
Right. Be the change.
Be the change.
In the world.
Oh, yeah. What do I want in the world? Peace. And he was a fantastic demonstration of that. Look what happened because of one man's decision to see peace instead of war.
He's pretty amazing that he was, I believe that nonviolent resistance, that movement, actually a lot of people don't know this, but I believe one of the first demonstrations of it was in South Korea, in relationship to the Japanese occupation. There's a day in South Korea called Mansei, which means I think it's March 3rd, where they all brought out their flags, and there was like a slaughter of some kind. But it was an example of nonviolent resistance, and it led to an eventual. It create nonviolent resistance pushes the hearts of the people that are the perpetrators of the violence, and it helps them heal as well, and it actually is effective. And then you had Gandhi first in South Africa and then in India, and then you had Nelson Mandela kind of taking on that role, and then MLK. And I don't know whether it's interesting. I don't know where the nonviolent resistant leaders are now. And, I would wonder where their voices will be heard.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this video, let us know, comment on that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a role for yogis in that.
If you find yourself in an oppressive situation, and it doesn't have to be an international oppression, it doesn't have to be a national oppression. If we really examine our lives carefully, we can see that we but oppress ourselves. And that's what Gandhi's demonstrating when he steps forward and says, in truth, oppression is impossible because I know that I'm totally free in my heart. You can smack my body around, but you'll never take my peace away. That's the demonstration that he and others have given us. And so if you're in an oppressive situation, it could just be a dysfunctional relationship, a marriage, a familial situation. It could be oppressive feelings at work. The first step is using it as a classroom and showing up and saying, showing up to work, showing up to the relationship and feeling this, feeling the idea that you are a part of this equation. And that once I realize that I want to be oppressed as much as this other person oppresses me,
right?
Then at that moment, the light goes off and it's like, whoa, I'm free. Like Nelson Mandela, I'm still in jail. I've been in jail now for 25 years, solitary confinement, a lot of it. But I've now realized, and if I can take responsibility for my perception of it, not the condition, I don't take responsibility for the problem itself. I just take responsibility for the way I see it and the way I've set myself up for it. Then I can start to unwind it. And in the movie, the Nelson Mandela movie, it's portrayed so beautifully. You can watch his mind unwind because he's very aggressive in the beginning. He's a fighter, and it didn't do any good, except it was his path, and it turns out it's the path of the entire country, because as he healed, everything changed because of his healing, and that's when he was released.
In the
That's how powerful the mind is. We can all do that.
In the Bhagavad Gita, it says, what a great man does, others will follow. And there's a song, it's written in the stars, that steel bars never does a prison cell make.
Right. Yeah.
That I'm interested in, I want to jump to another subject for a little bit.
Real quick, though, if steel bars never does a prison make, what makes the prison?
Well, it's the mind.
Our perception of it.
Right. Totally.
Put the bars around me. I'll decide whether I'm imprisoned or not. Right. If I'm fighting, let me out of here.
I actually used to fantasize about going to prison. And this is going to be a little weird admission. I used to literally fantasize about going to prison or solitary confinement because I was like, oh, it'd be so, like I could just be with myself. It'd be so, I don't know. Obviously, prison's not a place anyone really wants to be, but I don't know. Did you ever have those desires to go live in a cave or kind of be like a monk in that kind of way?
Not really. No, I know what you mean, though. I've thought about that. It's hard to hear those stories and then not briefly imagine yourself there. But I've learned to be very wary of what tempts the ego mind. Yeah. And I as quickly as those thoughts come up, I just want to come back to peaceful presence and just let them go because, our thoughts shape our lives.
Right. I've realized that all that's folly because, I actually do believe that solitude is really important. I remember Dharma Mitra saying in yoga classes to us, like, at some point in your life, you need to seek a little solitude and listen within and have those conversations. Like you were sharing about spending your 20s taking people on bike rides. You probably spent a lot of time talking to yourself, establishing a dialogue with your own inner voice. I think that's what I think leads to realization. That's one of the, I have these 7 habits of highly effective chakras, like these, 7 kind of habits that I think people who get to a spiritual awakening have. And one of them is having regular inner dialogue with yourself. That really can only happen in solitude when you're letting go of what other people's opinions should be or society's opinions should be, et cetera. Oh man, I forgot. I wanted to ask you. Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I'll make it short. There's separate solitude that's feels alone and kind of empty, and sometimes we have to go through that. That can be part of the path. Maybe you're drawn to a meditation or a retreat or something where there's a lot of silence. But there's solitude that's empty and alone, and then there's solitude that's joined. And then it's the realization you're never alone, because we're always, that's the idea.
Yeah, and I think that word solitude is a little loaded, because I think a lot of people feel lonely even though they have husbands and wives or partners or whatever, and I think there's a tremendous amount of loneliness and solitude that's happening because people are disconnected. I do think when you spend time alone and you establish that joining with your own self, that having that relationship with yourself or with God, other people say it's with God. And actually, I want to ask you, let's put a pin in this question. Who was the voice that told you to follow yoga? Was it your voice? Who was that voice? But I'll just answer. I'll just say before you answer that, having a relationship with an inner voice that's an actual dialogue allows people to never feel alone. And then I think it makes it even richer when you're with others. But go share. I'm really curious. Who is your inner voice? Who's your inner voice? And are they your angels? Are they your God? Are they you?
Yeah. Well, I guess I see it because A Course in Miracles has been my study for so long. The way I answer that would be in Course terms, which is the voice or the memory that we took with us into the dream is beneath all the raucous chatter, all the thoughts of fear and doubt. Beneath that, that's why the journey is inward, or like going down the rabbit hole. We got to go down through the stuff to get to the light and the peace, which wants to be known. It's just waiting down in our minds. And so, and we took the memory of heaven with us into the dream. And it's our yoga to unwind the blockages to that so we can start to hear it. And we've all heard it. We've all heard it.
Take me back. What's the metaphysics here? Can you give me the metaphysics of the book, The Course in Miracles? I'm unfamiliar with that. Is it Christian? Is it, and maybe you could describe that for us.
Yeah. We could be here all day, Andrew.
We'll
the
see
Course is, it's written in Christian terminology. The two scribes, they're called scribes. They one of them considered herself, they both really considered themselves agnostic, but they wanted to know the truth. They wanted to know, they were called together to know something greater than themselves. And so because Helen had kind of a Christian background, a lot of it came through in Christian terminology, which is there to help us unwind the deeply entrenched Christian sort of, you might say, masculine, and a lot of the terminology that when we hear these words, we shudder and we just want to turn away. Well, that's the yoga. If there's a word or a term that is irritating to me, I've got to get beneath that. I got to unwind that. And so that's a little bit on the terminology and why a lot of people don't like it. But the ego doesn't want us to like anything that's helpful. And there's many, many helpful spiritual paths that we nope. I know what's right. And as long as I'm in the I know mind, I'm not going to be happy and I'll be stuck. So that's that piece of it. Really quickly, the metaphysics is there is only love. And love is changeless, formless, perfect and eternal. Nothing here fits those. Nothing in the world of time and space fits those. And if you look at the physicists, the Einsteins, and Einstein was, if you look at his work, he was a spiritual man. He was inspired. Somehow he had this feeling, this experience of truth, And then he sought to put it in mathematical terms. And he said, and others like him said, the universe resembles a thought more than a thing, because once you get down deep enough, we're 99.99% space.
Space, yeah.
You can drill into a brick of concrete, and if you get it pixelates, and if you go deep enough, there's nothing there. So it's the belief that upholds everything. It's the belief that upholds a false sense of separation. And that just shows us how powerful the mind is. But it also is exactly what we start to unwind to bring us back to the timeless reality of true self.
So does Course in Miracles have concepts of past lives, eternal souls, heaven and hell? Or is it a non-dual teaching in the idea that we are all one consciousness split into infinite?
Yeah, great question. It's
infinite lands of Maya, infinite lands of illusion.
Yeah. Well, the Course I think is the ultimate non-dual teaching. It's been called the Western version of the Vedanta. And I've, as a yogi, I've studied both, and I've written about that in this book right here called The Yoga Mind. And this is a little, it says edited because I go back and write in it. I'm doing a second edition soon. But
wait, what? Oh, wow. I didn't, okay. Yeah, we'll
it's called The Yoga Mind, and it's the first book of the Yoga Sutras. The first book of the Yoga Sutras according to A Course in Miracles.
Oh, wow. Was that your co-author, Gene? Was he the...
He was my co-author, yeah.
The guy, he's the Tuesday with Morrie guy?
So we did write, and we did, but the gift got set aside, and then it was like, okay, we got to write about the Yoga Sutras because I'm about to open a yoga studio. All that was inspired. None of it was planned. Where were we? What were we talking about?
I was just you were saying how the Course in Miracles is like the Vedanta, the Western Vedanta. And it was just like, is there souls, reincarnation, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I asked is earlier you were saying about how we were falling down, like we have this memory of heaven that we took, heaven being unity consciousness. I don't know, or how you would describe it.
You could give it any capital.
Go ahead.
Describe it with any. You just got to give the word a capital letter, and give it and make it available to all. Nirvana. Right. Call it anything you want.
Right, nirvana, but it's not the same as like do good. There's going to be, 72 virgins, or there's going to be this person playing the harp, or there's St. Peter at the gate, or this or that. There's
no form in heaven.
Right, it's formless.
Our reality is spirit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's similar to the Buddhist concept of nirvana, nibbana, total returning to source. In the Tao Te Ching, it says returning to source is serenity.
Yes.
Those that know the source, or those that don't know the source or forget the source, wander around in confusion and sorrow. Those that know the source can walk the path of the Tao.
Yeah, and then we end up walking through the illusion or through Maya, guided and peaceful. It's like, I think it was the French philosopher that, can't think of his name right now, but maybe you can, who wrote a story on, Sisyphus pushing the stone up the hill, the Greek myth of pushing the stone up the hill, and then never getting to the top. No matter how much success we have in our lives, we never really achieve, and nothing will last here, and somebody else will come along and better it and all that.
Right, and 500 years from now, no one on the planet will know we existed.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, and that's right. And so the French philosopher, his name is not coming to me.
Not Descartes. I don't know. The only French philosophers I know are Descartes and Jean-Paul Sartre.
Yeah, maybe he wasn't French. Maybe I'm mixed up. Anyway, he said the only way out of that story is to see Sisyphus pushing the stone up with a smile on his face. And that's, he's pushing it up peacefully, knowing it doesn't matter if I get it to the top. Right. And that's how you were saying, we walk through life guided by the love and light. And that's why we stop planning and we live in the now, and we're inspired, sometimes quite spontaneously, to, wow, okay, I've got to go meet this person that I haven't seen in 10 years, or wow, I've got to make this shift. And then when we do, these miracles start to we just get so surprised so pleasantly when we turn the dream into a classroom.
What does the Course in Miracles believe about evil, and what do you think about? Is evil the folly of those who are farthest from remembering their true nature, or are some people, is some people's dharma or purpose, to be, evil, yeah, for violent? Like, if we are all God experiencing everything, people often ask why would God allow evil to exist? And are evil people bad?
Well, that's the Course would say that's the ego, or that's my false self trying to pull God into the dream. God never condemned. God knows not evil. How could perfect love ever know evil? And so there's this, anybody who's studied the Course has this one, there's lots of lines that we start to memorize, but one of them is, it's this idea in the mind of eternity, in the eternal mind, somehow there slipped this tiny mad idea that I could separate from my source. And then, of course, the ego wants to latch onto that and say, well, how do we do that? If we're not here, why does it seem like it? And that's not really a question. If you look at it, that's a statement that says, I am here. And the Course goes into lots of what is a real question? And questions, more often than not, pose as statements that anchor us in the illusion. And so ultimately we want to get to this point where our questions fall away because there is only answer. There's only joined unity. And the Course, like nothing else I've ever read in my life, the Course takes this position that you, me, everyone, the most evil person on the planet, everyone has already succeeded. That it's already over, and that we're already home in the heart of God, or in the heart of perfect love, and we never really left. How can you leave your reality? And so it takes a while. As you're reading it, you start to get this feeling like, oh my gosh, what an amazing perspective to start to pull me and draw me back into my true self.
Right.
With the realization that I'm already succeeded.
It's like you talked about sutras 1 to 3, and the classical translation is of sutra 2 is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So yoga is when the chitta, the mind, and the vrittis, the fluctuations of the mind, are nirodha, brought to silence or eliminated, right?
The ego self.
Yeah. And then it says, and then you experience yourself as true nature. And then it goes on to say, some vrittis, though, are helpful, and some vrittis are unhelpful. So some fluctuations of the mind can help you have that realization, and some are not helpful. And I think what you're describing is that idea within the Course in Miracles, to see yourself as if, and that all beings, even good beings, bad beings, evil, this, that they're already, and that they never really left. They're already enlightened. They never left. They never could be anything different. To just play with that idea, it's still a vritti, it's still an idea, but playing with it can lead to realization.
So beautiful, Andrew. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, is that not namaste? we throw that word around, namaste this, namaste, there's companies named after it, but you just described namaste. If I can see my worst enemy as healed and whole, then look at the inner work that I have done for myself. And that we could even say that is true prayer. To see the love and light in everyone and everything is so remarkably healing. It just brings up so much joy, and my cup runneth over, when I have that. But I have to, and Lori and I now, we're in our, let's see, we're in our, I can't do math right now, 30, we've been at the course now for 30 or 40 years. And we just went through a challenging situation. We had a situation, we're thinking about renting our house out and going, it's the first time we've ever rented our house out. And we love our house and we're kind of protective of it, And we had a situation where we got snaggled up in this renter situation that was just really bizarre. And so here we are just going, wow. And these deep feelings of our house is going to get taken over, all these irrational thoughts. This person is evil. We can't imagine him living in our house. But then the course, we do the lessons every day. And sure enough, the lessons that come up are always the ones we need. And it was all about forgiveness. Forgiveness is the key to happiness was the lesson that came up that day. And so we looked at each other and we sat down and we smiled and like, okay, let's see this person for who he really is and set him free. And in so doing so, we watched the peace come back into our hearts and mind. And just before this call, we got notice that he released himself from the lease. He voided it. And so we were able to, we looked at each other and we're like, oh my gosh, we're so grateful. But the test is, had he not signed that, would we still be as peaceful? And we had to lease to him. It's interesting. We signed a lease that the weird things started to happen and we kind of wanted to get out of it, but we couldn't. We were sort of bound. So you can't ever assume you know what is best. Peace is the goal. Forgiveness is the means. And we had to get to this point, whether he was going to live in our house or not, we were going to be okay with it. And then Spirit comes through and unwinds it. So now it just turns into a deep lesson. And sometimes in the end, it always goes our way, but we sometimes don't think it does.
Right. Todd Norian said something like, as long as you are in the present and at peace, and no matter what happened in the past, all is well. No matter what happened to you, or good or bad, anything that happened.
And that's the key.
The story changes based on the reality of the now.
That's right. So yeah. If our thoughts make our reality, then peace is the only thought I want. Yeah.
Wow. I think that might be a good place to end our journey today. This was a blast.
Oh man, that was so fun.
I didn't realize you had that book. It sounds like that's what you're working on the rewrite of. Or is there anything that you want to plug or share? Let people know, how can they connect with you if they want to study with you, learn from you? What's the best way for people to connect with you, Jeff?
Well, Avita Yoga Online is, after 10 years of owning a yoga studio, I got all the way through COVID, and then The Voice came in and unwound the whole thing, and now I'm all online. That's how we met, through Union, just an amazing platform for yoga. And so I have all my classes up there, and you can go to vitayogaonline.com and click on Get Started Here, and there's some free classes where I explain how we use the yoga props. It's a very, very, very different approach to yoga. And so I have to take anybody who's interested in it, that's had any other background, needs to go through these little tiny introductory videos to help explain what it is and how we use the props and how we do the compress release program. Yeah. So that's it. This book is going to be, I am editing it But right now I'm working on the Avita Yoga book. So that's
Nice.
Yeah, that's just been a total joy, and hopefully that's going to get published this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeff Bailey, Avita, Avita Yoga. Google it, and we'll put a link in the description.
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. Your presence is just beautiful. I can't wait to see you this summer in June at the festival. And
it's like a month away.
I know.
Yeah, I'm ready. I hope you are. You'll be ready.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Peace. Namaste to you, brother.
Namaste.
Hey, if you like that, hit like and subscribe. Join us for the next Dregs.